Good morning, venerables and friends. I've been fortunate over the last almost 16 years to learn from the folks on my left and my right, the venerables. But it's a continuing journey. It doesn't stop until you find nirvana, nibbana. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what has been called the noble search. It becomes a search where we have to choose between two different searches, the ignoble search and the noble search. This comes from the middle length discourse, Majjhima Nikaya number 26. It's called the Ariyapariyaya Sutra. And in Pali, Arya means noble, and Pariya means quest. So this is really a foundational teaching of the Buddha, which really sets out his personal journey, his personal story. Where did it all start? He found that his life of riches, he was rich beyond our wildest dreams. He was a prince, Siddhartha. And his father, the king, in a very small country in what we now would know as northern India, wanted to make sure that his son was protected. You've heard of the bubble boy. He kept him in a bubble. He kept him inside the palace walls. Why did he do that? Because he wanted to make sure that the prince would step into the king's shoes, that his son would take over the kingdom and continue the good work that the king had done. But who we now know as the Buddha, Siddhartha at that time, he decided that he wanted to see what was beyond the gold, the silver, his family, his isolation in the palace. So he convinced his charioteer to hook up the horses. He got in the carriage and he went beyond the walls. And he came upon an old man with a cane, and the man was bent over in obvious pain and suffering. And he asked the charioteer, "What is wrong with that man?" Now, today we would think that this would be taken for granted. And the charioteer said, he's old. And the prince said, "Well, am I subject to old age?" And the charioteer, kind of incredulous, said, "Of course you are." And they drove on, and soon they saw a funeral pyre by the Ganges. And the prince says, "What is wrong with that man?" And the charioteer said, "Sire, that's a corpse. That man is dead. And they're going to ignite him, and he will soon become ashes." And the prince said, "I too am subject to becoming ashes?" "Yes, sire, we all are." Eventually, the prince returned to the palace, and he became disenchanted with his existence, with his family relationships, with his wealth and possessions, his status and his reputation. He thought there must be a better way. Maybe you could say that he was wise at that time beyond what any of us could have imagined. And so he made the decision to seek the ultimate truth, if you want to put it that way, lasting peace. What he found was that, as we've discussed, everything is impermanent. Everything, except one thing. That's the only unconditioned thing in the universe. And that's, if you say nibbana, or you can say nirvana. Everything else in our life is conditioned. All things are conditioned. So what did he do? He realized, being subject himself to birth, these are the things that we do wrong. Ourselves being subject to impermanence, being subject to birth, we seek what is likewise subject to birth, to aging, to death, to sorrow, to lamentation. And it's what Master said. Another middle-length discourse, I think it's Majjhima Nikaya 57, says, there's gratification, which creates danger, but there is an escape. And that's the formula. So we see here the senses that create the gratification, which then unfolds into danger. The eye sees the desirable objects, sounds pleasing to the ear. The nose picks up appealing scents, taste with food, touch, sensations of comfort and pleasure. Now, it's very interesting in this particular sutra, which is a very, very early sutra. It's a Pali sutra. These 5 chords of sensual pleasure, you'll notice one of the most important things that the Buddha preached is missing: mind. If you go to the Dharmapada, which are very short teachings, I believe it's in the numerical discourses, one of the first things that the Buddha taught was everything starts with mind. So I think when you view these 5 sensual pleasures, you have to understand that the 6th element is the mind, because the mind controls everything. Vice versa, if you can control the mind, then you are in charge. So now the Buddha wasn't saying that it's bad to pursue career, wealth, strong family ties, friendships, sangha. What he is trying to convey is those will not give you lasting satisfaction. It's just like getting a scoop of ice cream. Eventually, you're going to get dissatisfied with eating ice cream. So it is with life. It's interesting, too, that all of the psychological research supported by functional MRI shows that people are not present in their own lives. And the research studies that I've seen were done over a decade ago. I don't know if they've been updated. I haven't done the research. But back then, we didn't have the phones that we have now. So just imagine, if it was 46% 10 years ago, Today, it's probably well over 50% that people are not present for their lives. What does that mean? To be not present for your own life. It means you're either ruminating about the past, some grudge, some person that cut you off in traffic, or you're worried about what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next year. It's not to say that you can't plan, but if you can't be present for your own life in the present moment, you're not really living. I'm sure that everybody agrees with that proposition. In the sutra, there's an analogy of a deer that's living in the forest, a wild, open space. But hunters have laid snares inside the forest. And those deers that get trapped in the snare are dead. The ones that avoid the snare lives free. The teaching with respect to this analogy is sensual pleasures are the hunter's bait. So those 5 chords of sensual pleasures, that's where the gratification comes in. If you can be aware and practice renunciation, then you're free to walk the Buddha's path. What does renunciation really mean? It means reflection. Reflection on your choices. If you know that a certain choice is going to cause you harm, then you seek to avoid it. And there's the escape. So the Buddha's own renunciation was that he was quite young, but after he saw all of the unsatisfactoriness, what we call dukkha, and you all know that the normal translation of dukkha is suffering. But the foremost Pali translator in our day, Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's been here several times, he says that that translation is really not accurate. It's more about unsatisfactoriness. Because no matter what we get, eventually we want more. More and more and more. And you can cut that desire off if you reflect on your choices. So what did the Buddha do? He realized that he's subject to birth, aging, death. And knowing this, why should I seek what is equally subject to the same things? So, and think about how hard this was. He put on robes, shaved his head, and went forth into asceticism or homelessness to seek the ultimate answer. And how did he even know that there was an ultimate answer? How did he have the wisdom to know there's some other way? And how difficult was that choice? He had a 1-year-old son, a wife, all the money he could ever want, but he threw it all away. Maybe it's not throwing it away, but setting it aside. And as you read, this is the pattern: gratification, danger, escape. Seeing the drawback, then seeing what is beyond it. So the Buddha, in his quest for the ultimate truth, found 2 teachers, Alara Kalama and Udaka Ramapuda. And these were the rock stars of the day. Now remember, there's no such thing as Buddhism 2,600 years ago. There was only teaching. And these two were the best teachers of their time. It's highly sought after by everyone. Kalama taught the dimension of nothingness, and this is a very refined state in meditative absorption. So the Buddha goes to him. Kalama teaches him. The Buddha quickly masters it. But he realized this doesn't lead to the ultimate truth. It leads to only a rebirth in the dimension of nothingness. Now, I don't know exactly what that means, but the Buddha could see that it wasn't the ultimate destination. And he even said, this Dharma leads not to just disenchantment, dispassion, to cessation, nor to unbinding. So he determined it wasn't the final goal. And again, how did he know that? The other teacher taught the meditation absorption of dimension of neither perception or non-perception. Again, the Buddha mastered it. At that time, he was a bodhisattva. He wasn't yet a Buddha because he wasn't fully enlightened. But he took to it and mastered it. And again, he decided that this didn't lead to nibbana. So he said it's not the final goal. And interestingly, before he renounced these two practices, both teachers asked him to teach. They were so impressed with this young man that they thought he could take over for them and lead their sangha and take it into the future. But he saw that it was not the final goal. So he decided, no, I'm going on. After those two teachers, he went to a city which we now know as Bodh Gaya. At that time, it was Urvala. And he sat down under a tree, not unlike the one pictured here, the Bodhi tree. And after 7 days, knowledge and vision arose in me, he said. Unprovoked is my release. This is my last birth. There is now no further becoming. So what does that mean? He had gone beyond defilements or extinguished them. He'd found that he will not be born into another life, and he'd entered what's called the deathless or nibbana. At this point in time, he thought, I'm free. There's nothing more for me to do. But there's a split in the canonical teachings, because in the Pali version of the Ariyapariyaya Sutra, the Brahman comes to, who's a god, I think today we would say Hindu god. The Brahman comes to what we now know as the Buddha and says, look, you got to teach this. You found the ultimate truth and nobody else has it. You'd be denying humanity this important teaching. And the Buddha said, I don't really need this. I don't think people will understand. In fact, he said, this Dharma is deep, hard to see, hard to realize, peaceful, refined, beyond the scope of conjecture, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. And fortunately for us, we now chant, the Dharma is deep and lovely. We now have a chance to see it, study it, and practice it. But we could not have that chance if the Buddha hadn't decided to teach. He saw the challenge. Everyone was attached, grasping to what we know as unconditioned. And he realized that there were some people that were beyond understanding the Dharma, but there were some with what he called little dust in their eyes, and those he could get through to. So out of compassion, that's what he decided to do. So this noble search that we are all on, it basically boils down to the quote, "The unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding." It's our recognition. It's our recognition that there's a different way. There's a different way to do things. So this is what we talked about earlier, the root of suffering or unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and impermanence. Two of the three marks of existence, right? Dukkha, impermanence, non-self. And what is dukkha? It's what we've already talked about. Everything that's conditioned carries inherent dissatisfaction. We can cling as tightly as we want, but eventually it goes away. Even you go away. That's the impermanence, anicca. Everything disappears. But it's important, as we talked earlier, to recognize that impermanence is not pessimism. It's the beginning of wisdom. Why is that? Because reality comes at you and you have to accept it as it is. Now, I'm not saying that there can't be advances in medicine, diagnostic procedures, study and practice in all fields. But if you have an inability to accept reality, the reality that comes to you in your life, and you try to push back against it, there's where the suffering comes in. So eventually this leads us to what? Well, we all know, the Noble Eightfold Path. A good way to remember this is to come up with a letter for each, like somebody told me, visa, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, and then livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. So visa limik is a good way to remember it. And I still forget it from time to time. Oh, L. Yeah, livelihood. So how do we practice this particular path? It's what Master Jiru said. Realize the gratification, see the danger, and look for the escape. For our practice, this would look like perhaps reevaluating your goals, finding peace and security within. As I talked before, the Buddha said, everything begins with mind. So if you can find a way of peace in your own mind, you go a long way towards serenity. And I've had people say, well, have you ever tried meditation in the middle of a crisis? And they respond, how can I meditate? Everything's going wrong. Well, that's not the way it works. It's like Master said, you can't wait until the very end. You can't wait until you're ashes. You've got to do this every day. Practice every day your meditation. Practice the Vipassana meditation that's taught here, the insight meditation. What is it? Insight into what? It's insight into the process of reality. How do things work? How does your mind work? How does your mind take something and add a piece and add another piece? And pretty soon, you're off on a thought train and there's no substance. You're not your thoughts. Too often, and I am the same. Too often, I let thought take over, and it's a fabrication. It's like a bubble on a pond. True liberation is finding your own path, both through meditation and ethical living. These are the terms that we talked about in both their English and Chinese characters. One thing that you won't see here is non-self, probably the most difficult of the three marks of existence to grasp and understand. And before I close, I'd like to read something that was issued this year in January by Master Jiru. Reflect on your personal lives and in society the image of the fire horse, this is the Chinese year of the fire horse, reminds us constantly to be mindful, to temper excessive enthusiasm and restrain impulsive thoughts, so that surging energy does not become extreme or unbalanced. In this way, we can advance steadily, achieve maturity and success in our career and studies. The red fire horse most fully embodies the spirit of the Bodhisattva. Its character is courageous and joyful with strong initiative and great momentum. Daring to charge forward, the horse welcomes challenges, fears no competition, and faces hardship and change directly. In times of great transformation and intense struggle, the innate Bodhisattva spirit shines forth, standing at the forefront, leading by example, persevering through hardship, and courageously assuming responsibility. This is precisely the guiding strength our times require. Thank you, everyone, for listening.